Okay. Good afternoon, friends. My name is Gary Allen. I'm the president of the Maryland Forestry Foundation, and it's our privilege to present the webinar series Framing the Future each month on the third Thursday at 1 o'clock. And I want to thank you for joining us for this holiday season presentation by one of our most active organizations here in the state and the urban areas. It's a pleasure to have you today. I want to remind you two things. One is that this seminar is being recorded, and the fact that it will be posted on the new Maryland Forestry Foundation website, which is scheduled to be launched before the end of the year. And it will include a recording of the past 25 webinars over the past 2 years. Many of you have asked to see some of our earlier recordings, and we've had a lot of technical difficulties in making them available. And at long last, it looks like they'll be available on the new foundation website. The good news is that our moderator for this series will continue into the new year. And she's also on our board, and so I'm very pleased to introduce Megan Carr, one of our first Mel Fellows and a good friend, and one we've been a pleasure working with over the past 25 of these sessions in the time that it's been presented. Join us in the coming year. We'll say a little bit more about that at the end of this webinar. Megan, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Gary. Yeah, so welcome, folks. Very excited, as always, to join you on the third Thursday of the month to chat forestry and forest policy. A couple quick housekeeping notes as we're getting started. If you have questions for our speaker today, please enter those in the Q&A field in your Zoom window. For most users, that's going to be found at the bottom of your screen. You may need to click on 3 dots and open up the More field and scroll through to find it. But we will address those questions at a couple of points through the discussion today, and we will have some time at the end of the session as well. So please do get those in if you have any questions. We're very excited today to highlight the amazing work being done by Baltimore Green Space to conserve, protect, and examine forest patches in Baltimore City, and probably most importantly, to support and recognize the community stewards that make these places so vital. So very excited today to be joined by Katie Lowder to talk about one part of their work in particular, but she will delve into that shortly. Katie Lowder is the Executive Director of Baltimore Green Space. Born and raised in Baltimore, she came to this work through her love of Baltimore, nature, and communities. She holds a master's degree in environmental education with a focus on equity studies and has more than 16 years experience in nonprofit management, community organizing, and educational program development. She earned her master's at Lesley University, living outdoors in different bioregions. In 2020, she was the recipient of the Eileen Hughes Award, recognizing her for forward-thinking and innovative approaches to urban land trusts and the inclusion of urban forest stewardship. She was also recently appointed by Governor Wes Moore to the Green Space Equity Programs Advisory Board, and very excited to finally have her featured in this series. So welcome, Katie. I will give you the floor.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen and get to it. So let's make sure it comes out right. All right. So are you seeing my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Perfect. So as Megan mentioned, I'm Katie Lowder, the Executive Director of Baltimore Green Space, and Baltimore Green Space is a conservation land trust for community managed green spaces. We preserve community gardens, pocket parks, and forest patches, and we also teach people how to care for forests. In tandem with this work, we conduct advocacy work that supports leaders caring for green spaces and advances the protection of more green spaces. Right now, we protect 8 food gardens, 5 pocket parks, 2 forests, 2 farms, a horseshoe pit, a wildlife refuge, totaling 62 acres of land. We regularly work with 10 to 15 forests each season doing forest education. I'm going to focus this workshop on our forest work, but there's a whole other side of our preservation and conservation work that won't be covered today, but I'd be happy to talk with you about at some other time if you want to reach out to me. So, welcome to the woods. We work in forest patches, both large and small. This is actually Govan's urban forest. It's less than a 1/4 acre. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to honor the forest stewards, past and present, who pulled Baltimore Green Space into this work with their love of community forest patches. They pulled us forward, and now there's a whole program serving other neighbors just like them. This is Butch Berry, former steward of Springfield Woods, and there are many others carrying on the legacy at a hyper local level. We also would like to take a moment to thank a few of our funders that specifically funded the research that I'm going to talk to you about. And this season's research was funded partially or partnered with UMBC, the U.S. Forest Service, Chesapeake Bay Trust, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the EPA, and the Department of Public Works. So we thank them for their belief in this work as well. So Baltimore Green Space founded the Forest Stewardship Network in 2012 when leaders from several communities asked us what we could do to protect their neighborhood forest patches, or if their forest patch was even valuable. And so we convened a meeting with several of them and other nonprofit leaders and experts, and so that they could all think together about what the solutions to their needs were. And those meetings continue quarterly and drive all of our work, and have since that moment, on this side of the work anyway. But another reason we began the work was because of this forest patch here. This is Wilson Woods. And right, just above this circle and next to the circle, the yellow circle, you'll see Wilson Woods. This is in the neighborhood of historic Wilson Park. And a neighbor bought 2 lots behind his house of the forest, and the neighbors knew he was going to clear them. And they called us and they said, "Is there anything you can do to stop this? We don't want to lose part of our forest." And we did a bunch of research and looked into all the regulations and learned at that time that there was nothing we could do to slow down this forest from being lost or even prevent it. And so, unfortunately, at that time, the forest conservation triggers at a city level were at 20,000 square feet of disturbance. And we would go on from there to advocate that those triggers would change. And you'll hear more about that later. But we did lose this forest patch, and you can see, or this part of that forest patch, and you can see that we also lost the topsoil in addition to the trees. And there was one ash tree left behind. And as you know, the ash has been vulnerable to the borer. And so that one last tree has also passed away. So, this space is actually 10 degrees hotter now than the forest patch next to it. But that got us asking how many places like this in Baltimore were vulnerable. And so we worked with UMBC to do an analysis of Baltimore's forest patches and to really understand how many of them there are, where are they, how many of them could fall prey to not having strict enough regulations. And we produced a white paper. This was in 2013. You can find it on our website, that kind of talks about both the makeup of Baltimore's forest patches and all of the loopholes which make them more vulnerable, and things to improve as far as policy regulations go. And at that point, we learned that more than 20% of Baltimore's tree canopy is in forest patches outside of parks on land that can be bought and sold. So, and there are over 2,000 forest patches in Baltimore, and 14,000 acres. While we were doing this analysis, we were simultaneously working with neighbors. The way that we conduct our work with neighbors is to make sure that we're doing activities that teach people how to fall in love with their forest and provide educational opportunities like this bird walk here. And then we rotate between activities that teach them how to best care for their forests, like how to create trail pathways like this workshop here, or how to remove villainous vines and remove trash from forests like this workshop here. This year we held 66 workshops with 1,307 volunteers contributing 1,074 hours of service, which included the removal of 454 bags of trash and invasives. We also make sure that we produce educational guides as we are developing the best ways to move through this work. We turn them into a toolkit. So this is our first toolkit, which is Forest Patch First Aid. This is what we bring to anybody who wants to start the work. It has the basics of how to get your neighbors involved, the basics of what to understand about a forest, and it was also vetted with our forest stewards. This can also be found on our website. So before I go in deeper into the research, I wanted to have an opportunity for questions here.
So we currently don't have any questions in the Q&A. We can pause for a moment in case folks are trying to finish typing.
Okay.
I think some of the questions that I have are probably going to be covered almost immediately by the next few things that you touch on, I suspect. So we'll see if
Okay.
that pans out. So
All right.
currently we don't have any open questions. So if you'd like to continue.
Yep. So while there are invaded forest patches in Baltimore, we find ourselves a lot, what part of our role is to speak to the myths of what is an urban forest. And what people expect to find in an urban forest. And most often, we get the expectation that all of our forests are going to be nothing but invasive trees and species. And there's a term trash forests that people like to use that I think should be stricken from the vocabulary. But most folks believe that you're going to find nothing but invaded dangerous forests. However, this picture here is a forest patch in Baltimore. It is one of the healthiest forest patches in Baltimore, and there are really healthy forest patches in Baltimore in addition to invaded forests. So we've documented more than 50 native species in Baltimore, and this particular patch has wintergreen and low bush blueberry, which, if you know anything about forests, you know that is a sign of a healthy forest as well. But we do also have severely invaded forests. This is also a patch in Baltimore, where there are some very, very old trees in this same patch that are vulnerable to this invasion that has gotten into the canopy. Sorry, my slides aren't advancing. There we go. So we've done more than 110 on-the-ground surveys at this point, and I'm going to talk to you a little, but when we first went through, so we did a GIS analysis to locate the patches, but then we went through and went and did on-the-ground surveys at the patches themselves to kind of ground truth the data. And when we went through the first 88, we learned that 32.8% of the patches have a water feature, and 73% had seedlings present, which you see a lot less in rural environments because of the deer pressure. But there are some benefits of having smaller patches be a little bit isolated. We've documented actually at this point over 98 species of birds, including interior dwelling species. This is an Acadian flycatcher, a woodland specialist, and 15 of these were spotted in 35 patches that we surveyed for birds. Hold on, I just want to go back one more. There we go. Okay. There's also a mythology that urban folks don't enjoy nature, and yet about 74% of the patches that we were in showed signs of access points. 52% showed signs of use, which means there were actually trails, and 36% showed signs of stewardship. And when we say stewardship, what we mean is there were intentional plantings, signage, and other indications of active community care. As further evidence of this, when we did one of our first forest reports for Fairwood Forest, we did a door knocking campaign in the neighborhood to let them know that the U.S. Forest Service was going to come out and talk about their forest report, which resulted in, sorry, it's advancing on me, which resulted in 34 people showing up for a hike in a 4-acre forest in Baltimore. And there were so many people there that I had to echo everything that Ian Yeselonius of the U.S. Forest Service said, like I was a human megaphone. It was a lot of fun, but definitely an unexpected number of turnout for this event. Um, So partially because of our long-term goal to preserve community forest patches, we eventually created a more serious forest health research protocol. So we'll talk to you more about exactly the detail of our forest health protocol, but the most shocking thing that came, well, it wasn't shocking for us because at that point we had been to so many forest patches, but to have the data that showed that in all of the forest patches we went to that round, all of them showed more than 85% native tree species. So back to the myth that we're going to only have invasives, we now have the data that shows you that we have a native tree canopy to protect. So we developed a pretty intensive forest health protocol. You can now download that as well. We tried to make it so that it is deliberately replicable, and could be replicated by this is an educational module and it's a step-by-step guide. So, what is the forest health assessment? This was created to assess the health of forest patches from the soil layer to the vegetation to the invasion. This can not only better inform policymakers about the health and importance of forests in Baltimore, it can also better inform the scientific community about forest health and composition. And most importantly, it helps to support the stewards in understanding what is special about their forests and can inform their management decisions. These surveys were originally conducted for the first time in 2015 and 2016. And in the past year and a half, we redid them to see a kind of like a before and after. This work was supported in 2015 and 2016. The work was supported by the Office of Sustainability, the U.S. Forest Service, UMBC, and the Johns Hopkins Center for Social Concerns. So this work has been iterative. We first did, we did the GIS analysis, and then we did the on the ground surveys, and then we went and did the really in-depth forest health protocol. We started the first set with we did 10 each summer, and now we're up to 47 of the in-depth forest health protocol. So the health protocol, what we learned the very first time we did it was that um, that the soils were healthier than anyone would have expected. They told us once we looked at soils, we'd be lucky if we found an A layer of soil. And so the O is the healthiest layer, the A is the next healthiest, and then as you go down, it gets less and less healthy. But in every single one of the forests, we found an A layer, and some of them we found an O, which is really good. And it also speaks to the forest's ability to filter stormwater. That's part of the reason we wanted to look at soils, was to be able to make good arguments about how forests were better at filtering stormwater. We also confirmed that the majority of trees in Baltimore's forest patches were native, with almost every forest showing 85% native or more. We found that the majority of our forests have saplings, which means these forests have a healthy future ahead of them. Native plants diversity is incredibly important in supporting forest ecology because native plants support the invertebrate communities at an exponentially higher level than non-natives. This in turn supports much of the other wildlife that makes up a healthy forest. And so here are some examples of the wildlife that is supported by a forest. I mean, if caterpillars are wildlife. As I mentioned before, there's a myth that forest interior dwelling species of birds need 5 acres. We've documented them in 2.5 acres. And when I say we've documented them, I mean nesting, not just migrating. And so the triggers that are the measures that are identified for forest interior dwellers are not really based in research of urban areas. And so, and we were able to show that with our research, and it's something that needs to change in policy moving forward, because a lot of these measures drive policy. We've also have some of our scientific friends, Matt Baker and Mike Alonso, did research on the differences between heat impacts of forests versus other canopy types. And so we have street trees, trees over grass, and then we have forest patch canopy. And what they learned is that forest patches are better at cooling communities than any other canopy type. And there's a full scientific paper on that to share with you all as well. So that's another myth about forest patches, is that any kind of canopy is just as good as a forest. It's actually true that forest patches are better at cooling and therefore should have stronger protections if we're thinking about climate resilience. To further demonstrate this, we recently were part of a research study with the Natural Areas Conservancy that is looking at the difference between healthy and degraded forests and cooling impacts of those. And their first proof of concept set of research shows that healthy forests are better at cooling than actually invaded forests. So that's good news for making arguments for more money for managing forest care. So here's another slide showing you that that the difference in temperature between a healthy and degraded area. So you can see that it's about 10 degrees cooler in the healthy area, which is less than 200 feet away from the other area that we researched. So, I mean, it's like these two places were pretty proximal to each other. So the first time that we put together this set of forest reports was in 2016. And then last year we redid them. And so we were able to put together a pretty huge reports for each forest steward that we worked with. And because of our interest in forest patch health over time, we wanted to be able to see the progress, but we also wanted to be able to show stewards that they were making progress. Because if you're working on the ground day to day, this work can feel really daunting. And even if you are making progress, it's hard to tell. But us working with forest stewards enables us to show them in more tangible ways where they are actually having impact. So we worked with our scientist team to reproduce the survey, and we just want to say a hats off to Matt Baker and Ian Yeselonius for doing the lion's share of mentoring us and our fellows this season as we moved through this report. I'm going to pause for questions there too.
Great, yeah. So we'll again give folks a chance to type their questions into that Q&A box. So please do that. But while they're doing that, I'm kind of curious, and to backtrack back to the kind of start of this section, you're thinking about people's perceptions of the forest patches around them. I'm curious, what you found. Have you had an opportunity to compare, say, like your forest health assessment results with things like the studies that Nancy Santi did, talking to neighbors about their perceptions of neighboring forests, to try and kind of get at, specific to each neighborhood site, what the perceptions are and how they mesh with reality on the inside of the forest patch?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we were actually partnered with Nancy in her research when she did it the first round, and we are and her paper was a while ago when we were working with less forest patch leaders. And it's a pretty small sample set. And though her research is like super interesting, because for those of you who haven't read it, what it shows is that some people are still scared of the forest. Some people just like to look at it, but they do enjoy like looking at it from their windows. And then some people actually use it. And it was a very diverse set of results. And we're looking to reproduce that work with Nancy on a wider scale. In the future, we just haven't found the funding source to kind of be able to partner with her properly on that.
Yeah,
Does
I
that
would
answer your
imagine
question?
that. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I imagine that would be a big lift in terms of just having enough people to do the door knocking and
Yeah.
have all those conversations. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat. So first we have from Thayer. Have you documented nesting breeding forest interior dwelling species in 2.5 acres or just the presence?
We've documented nesting breeding. Yes. Not extensively fair to the level of to the, so for those of you who are scientists, there are like special ways it's to really document very carefully some of this stuff. But so Thayer, for your reference, working with the Baltimore Bird Club and Eric Fischel is certified in the Smithsonian Bird Study. They've documented nesting for nesting interior dwellers and nesting and mating interior dwellers, just like we would go and do a count and document, but they haven't actually set up like a formal, full-fledged study in that way. Does that answer your question?
I think it may. We'll give them a chance to respond. Someone had added additional context in the Q&A chat to state a note regarding forest interior dwelling species. The minimum patch sizes are more related to successful nesting, not occurrence. For example, wood thrush will inhabit patches as small as 2 acres as you found, but the literature has found nest success drops below 50% in forest patches under 200 acres. And that's citing Hoover et al. From 1995.
Yeah, I'd just be interested to know how many species they've observed, how many species they've actually done formal research related to over time in urban areas, rather than, I mean, that I would love to know more. But that is like a sweeping kind of rule that's used to keep, so what happens then is they turn that into a rule that says, we will only support the acquisition of forests for conservation that could support forest interior dwellers. And what it ends up doing is excluding smaller forest patches in urban areas from getting resources for land protection.
Yeah, I think that's a
Under the
really
gu-
great point.
Yeah, under the guise that forest interior dwellers never live there, right? Which, you know, as you mentioned, is not exactly accurate.
And right, and of course, too, noting that the patch size is not going to be the causative driver of that. It's going to be, um, you know, a side effect or correlated rather than, causational in terms of bird survivability. But excellent. So we have a question from Kathleen who says we're having huge problems with roaming cats denuding our forest patches and yards large and small of birds, small mammals, and reptiles. The critters in the fragments are especially vulnerable. So I think that may be a note as to some of those causative factors.
Yes, we see that in some of the patches too. There's not the cats. The only thing you can really do about them is encourage people to put bells on them if they're going to be outside. Unfortunately, but yeah, it's an issue.
Absolutely.
Okay, so just a little bit more about the forest health assessment. This is a rapid sampling protocol designed to sample the whole of the forest. And it's not an inventory. Okay, so an inventory is a 1-by-1, it counts everything. And a rapid assessment, a rapid sampling protocol gets the wider net, but doesn't count every single thing. So we establish a 30-meter grid, like you see pictured here. and we position it in a way to fit the most points that would spread across the whole forest to get a better idea to characterize the whole forest space. We assessed the tree canopy um, at each point, and we used a cruiser prism to assess relative dominance of the trees. And so what you do is you look through the prism here, you can see a person is looking through the prism, and anything that where the tree separates from itself looking through the prism, it doesn't get counted, but if it overlaps in any way, it gets counted and identified. We also measured the invasion of the canopy using a scale that we invented called the Schumacher scale, invented by Nell Schumacher, our intern, who has since passed away. But at the time, invasive protocols, they only do stem counts on the ground. So there was no way to tell how much of the canopy was endangered by the previous methodologies that were out there. And so we had to design the scale to be able to characterize how far invaded the canopy was. So each stem gets a score of how invaded it is, and then we use that invasion score for things you'll see later. So this is the meter square. At each point, we put down a meter square and we do a percent invasion of and percent in natives, percent invasives in the square. And we do identify every species in that square. And we also identify leaf litter and bare grounds. And the percentages are our metrics for ground invasion. So we do a soil assessment where we both do a soil punch and we do a soil horizon profile. We measure the depth of the A and O layers, and we assess the soil for texture, and we use a penetrometer to look at soil compaction. All of these things speak to the ability to filter stormwater and manage stormwater, but also the health abilities of the soil itself. So this is just what I talked about earlier about the different soil horizons. And you can see O means the organic layer, A is the surface layer. You get down to B and you're in subsoil. And further down, it's less and less likely to have the organic matter that can support plant life. At each point, as I mentioned, we take a soil core and we look at both the bulk density and organic matter. And I just love this picture because it looks like a painting palette. As a painter myself, I find it all the different colors of soil. These are the soils of Baltimore's forests. So what we've learned looking at 2016 to now, or for Still Meadow, we actually took their research. We did the research in 2017. So we're going to use Still Meadow as the first site to tell you about the progress. And I want to first say that Still Meadow Peace Park is a wonderful place. And it also happens to have more volunteers than any other place because of the way they're able to leverage the pastor's resources to serve the forests. But in 2017, you'll see that the canopy, so anywhere you see our invasion scale, blue means great and red means whoa, danger. And anything getting close to red means we should worry. And you can see that almost the entirety of Still Meadow Peace Park is covered with whoa, the canopy is about to be overtaken. And they've been able to leverage enough resources from 2017 to 2022. And part of this is also how we tell folks to focus. We say, focus on protecting the canopy first. So we have them make windows in the vines that are climbing up the trees. And then we go to the ground layer, and you can see they've made amazing progress in their canopy layer. They're really approaching healthy levels, but it's a much healthier canopy. So it's now at yellow. We really want to be to green or blue, but they had no green or blue areas previously, and now you can see they have blue and green areas coming up. So this result of this stewardship is a dramatic change from the old invasion map, predominantly medium and high. It's just kind of spectacular. But we are seeing that there are similar patterns in all of the stewarded spaces. So these are the individual results of several of our stewarded sites, the general trend being a decrease in canopy invasion. So you can see the places where there is active stewardship, there's dramatic invasion decrease at every site. So this is just evidence that forest stewardship really makes a huge difference. The other thing is that we've documented, well, we've counted in this set 1,364 trees from 2021 to 2023 season, and we've identified 50 different native species. 52 native species. And 92% of the species in the canopy were native. The dominant trees found at the sites in this set in this season was white oak, typically found in older interior forests, as well as being our state tree. Tulip poplar, most often found in gap species, sassafras, typically an understory species, and black locust and edge or early succescent species. And there they are, popping out. Ta-da! While native trees are dominant in Baltimore's forest patches, there are some invasion warnings. Norway maple is most often an interior species, and Ailanthus does show up as an edge species at some places. For example, when we were surveying Notre Dame, there was a high number of Ailanthus, which is the tree of heaven and the host of the spotted lanternfly. Ta-da! Spotted lanternfly. They are crazy. Canopy composition is varied across sites and does not tend to change as fast as other forest metrics. So, but you can still see that, okay, so if you look at, from 2016 to 2023, most of them are increasing in native canopy, with the exception of a few places, and we'll talk more about those in a second. So here is the ground layer invasion. And now looking at the ground cover, we're seeing this type of reduction in ground cover invasion at many sites as well. So you can see, we showed you the canopy invasion, and this is the ground layer invasion at Stillmeadows. So similarly, the ground layer invasion was pretty overwhelmingly red and invaded. And now looking at the 2022 map, you can see that we have a lot more healthier spaces. So they made progress in both their ground layer and their canopy layer. We see similar patterns at other forest patches. So this is, even though it may be not as dramatic, this is the ground cover at Fairwood Forest. You could see in 2016, they didn't have any yellow or blue areas. Now, this is also an example of a place that has less stewards. So those stewards are making an impact with these blue marks here and the yellow marks on the 2022 slide. So in this case, there are 3 areas of reduction matching up with the gathering areas of where the stewards spend time. Then the other blue area is where one of the neighborhood forest stewards lives. And so this just really points out that where the stewards do their work really matters, and you can actually see it in the map. But this actually ends up encouraging forest stewards to keep doing the work. Though the overall invasion did not decrease much at some sites, our surveys revealed an interesting trend across all stewarded forests. Many of the managed invasive species have been reduced or removed in forests that have high level of stewardship, but English ivy remains at the ground level. So what we're seeing is that like we're able to, there's a lot less diversity in the invasive species, and English ivy is taking over, is what that means. And so now it's just a matter of removing one invasive as like IDing as many as we had to before. So here's the composition of the ground layer across all sites combined in one pie chart. And so we still have high levels of invasion, but the diversity is increasing at the diversity of natives is increasing. So we'll show that another way in a second. But first, I want to talk about the biggest invaders. English ivy is the #1 invader that we have seen across all of the patches, like #1. #2, winter creeper. #3, garlic mustard. #4, Japanese honeysuckle. #5, porcelain berry. And #6, multiflora rose. Though there is invasive cover, the takeaway shouldn't be that invasives are dominant. It should be that there is crazy diversity, including native diversity. We documented 61 native species and 34 non-native. So the natives are almost double in that of the non-natives. Also, we documented 24 species of tree saplings, meaning that with care, these forests have a healthy future. We're finding more and more rare and endangered plants in Baltimore's forest patches, such as Atlantic goldenrod, ghost pipe, and wintergreen, all of which have very specific growing conditions. Atlantic goldenrod is a wetland pollinator that can help attract unique pollinator species. Ghost pipe is a fungal parasite, meaning there are unique and healthy fungus in that forest and attracts a unique native bees for its pollination. And wintergreen, another rare plant, has been found in Baltimore's forests. Time for questions.
Excellent. Yeah, and your last slide, one of the things I had jotted down was most exciting or surprising species found in your assessments. 'Cause I spotted that note on spotted wintergreen in Fairwood Forest on one of your documents, and that's so cool. I love hearing
Yeah.
that. So Sarah Hildebrand was wondering if your rapid forest health assessment protocol is something you can share. So where might she find that?
Yeah, it definitely is. I can throw it in the chat. But it's actually on our resources page at Baltimore Green Space as well. But like I don't want to toggle. I'll do that at the end if that's okay, because I don't want to toggle away from the screen share.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I think at the end of the session, we may still have the regular chat disabled, but we could use maybe the whiteboard function or something
Okay.
similar to put that up on the screen.
That sounds good.
And John would like to know how many persons are engaged in the stewardship and are any paid or are all volunteers?
So we have a forest manager who runs our program. The majority of the forest work is volunteer, but the forest health assessment was paid fellows that did the work. We had 4 fellows. Well, yeah, we had 4 fellows this season, 2 research fellows and 2 community engagement fellows. And then we are also starting to work with some workforce development crews to train them in forest care. So primarily volunteer, and the volunteer numbers that I mentioned earlier, like over 1,000 volunteers, most of those are our forest numbers. So it's mostly volunteer. Other questions?
Great. Yeah, the other current open question is getting back to domestic cat predation. So I think that might just indicate that we might need to have an entire session on cats and their role in our local ecosystems.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. I would love to be there and learn more.
Excellent. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Another aspect of what we're looking into in the report comparison was to see how much. One of the tools we decided to use this year was a formal restoration at one of the sites that we protected, and we're looking at this as a strategy for helping stewards do their work. So So Butchberry was an incredible steward and caretaker of this site at Springfield Woods, and we initially got a funding for the restoration because to work at Springfield Woods because we were going to bolster his work, and we wanted it to help jumpstart the next generation of leaders, and so we're seeing really good similar results to those of Still Meadow at in doing a formal restoration. And so this is just showing the progress at Springfield Woods, and we think that this is a very good tool for supporting stewards. We're seeing similar reduction of ground layer invasion at these spaces with an increase in native diversity. And this again can be a real major boost for stewards. Site leader transitions do happen with site leaders passing away, people moving, or people getting too busy, change in politics, COVID, or whatever reason. And what we saw was in almost all of our stewarded sites, where there was a drop in stewardship, we saw an increase in canopy invasion, with one exception, which we'll go into later. So you can see this is the fading stewardship and this is the active stewardship, and you can kind of see they have an inverse correlation. So what is stewardship? It's neighbors who are taking care of the spaces, it's volunteers coordinating, it's experts helping out. And this above is some research we didn't expect. Well, not research, but like results we didn't expect. So there was a drop in forest care at this site, but there was also a dramatic canopy invasion. And this site particular has an interesting phenomenon which happened to surface. Winston Govans has a lot of bamboo, so it has like just a very different invasion structure. And its invasion increased pretty faster than other places. So typically this place doesn't have a high level of vine invasion, but it has a terrible level of bamboo invasion. And it's deteriorated faster than the others. There's this other myth that healthy forests take care of themselves. Hep Forest was one of the healthiest forests we've ever been in. Foresters would go in and be like, "Are we sure this isn't a forest, an old growth remnant?" And we'd be like, "Yeah, we're sure. We looked at the history of the data." But it had a drop in stewardship, and you can see it's now showing signs of invasion. So in urban environments, even the healthy forests need a little bit of help. So this is the ground cover vegetation. And so this is just showing you we've got 61% vegetation, 18% bare ground, and 21% leaf litter. Some more ways of showing that. One thing we have to caution stewards against is not removing too much without replacing, because otherwise our little salamanders and other things that need the understory are not going to survive. And we don't want that. Any questions there?
No questions currently in the chat, but that last
Cool.
graphic was phenomenal.
We're going to keep going then. So as we do the research, we're always, like I said, producing educational modules. And this season, we chose to not only have research fellows, but to have forest outreach fellows that were developing educational components as the research fellows were gathering their data. And so this was Dr. Felicia Tenoye. She worked with us for 6 months, kind of helping to develop additional tools for community leaders related to the research. And so she developed some modules that were hyper related to whatever invasive they had at their space or whatever native. So Springfield Woods has Chinese yam. Not many of the other places have it, but she produced a guide that was very specific to that, had details and the different states of the plant. You know, it has a flowering stage and a fruiting stage and all of that. And so there's a guide now for them that is related to that. And similarly, they have jewelweed there, and jewelweed is a native that hummingbirds love, love, love. It's the antidote to poison ivy, and it grows there as well. And so several of the natives have really have their own guide for each forest steward. And then we share those out with community. But the takeaway points here, sorry, one slide back. The takeaway points here are Baltimore's forests are diverse, stewardship works, restoration can help support community efforts, and forest care really matters. But I want to go back to this, like, so you're seeing the data from our before and after of a set of 10 to 20. But we've been in 57, and in those 57, 50% of the sampling points were entirely native, and 90% of the points consist of more than 75% native trees. And so we really have a native tree canopy to protect. Similarly, it's important for us to know what species are here so we can teach community and we can know what the makeup of the places are. So we talk about this as know your place. Know what's there, know what's important about it, know what to love, know what to protect. And so Baltimore's overstory canopy in the 57 spaces was dominated by early secession tulip poplar, followed by the state tree white oak, and the understory tolerant northern red oak, and the red maple and American beech. And the green ash. These 6 species constituted 50% of the sampled understory. Then I want to go to some other important information is that we are able to document that the edge and interior species have a specific change measure, which means that there's a certain point at which the interior species starts and the edge species end, right? So structural and compositional shifts in both overstory and ground cover species revealed indicators of edge at at less than 18.7 meters and interior at greater than 41.5 meters, as well as evidence of transitional zones and distinct patterns of biodiversity. And so this has implications for planning for management of edge and thinking about where interior species start and end. And these are interior plant species specifically. So we have been in 47 patches, 854 points of data over 9 years and summers with amazing interns, fellows, partners, stewards, scientists, and staff. And currently, Eric Fischel, who could not be here to present, does the majority of the on-the-ground work. I used to do it, and he took over for me. And I want to say a shout out to some of our other partners. Again, we have all these amazing students and scientists, and a shout out also to Charlie Davis, who has worked with us for many, many years, and the forest stewards, of course. But all of this leads to us doing more advocacy work. So initially, I talked to you guys about how the forest conservation triggers were not low enough. So we also did policy work to change that. And Baltimore City's policy triggers for forest conservation are now at 5,000 square feet of disturbance. And we also continue to do other forest and tree related advocacy with partners, some of whom are on this call. And so stay tuned for some bills that are coming out to protect trees on public property and private property in the future. So I'm going to share one more slide. Thanks also to the families like Sylvester and Laretha Myers family and their neighbors who care for forests and all the advocates. So I'm going to stop sharing and allow for more questions.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. And yeah, and love bringing it back around to the stewards and to the policy and angle as well. So one of the big focuses of our ongoing discussions here. So a couple quick questions in the few minutes we have remaining. Thayer would like to know, do you have easements on your forests, or are they more informally defined? He noticed some differences in the shape of before and after surveys and was curious if you could comment on that as well.
Yeah, so for the forests that we protect, we own them fee simple. And we have a specific land disposition agreement that prevents them from development into anything but a green space. We co-hold the easement on Masonville Cove, but our forested spaces are not eased. That's not to say that there are at least 25 easements that Baltimore City holds on forests. And there are some state-held easements in Baltimore City as well. The
Great.
shape change was due a little bit to how the students were figuring out how to map yeah, so that's the answer to that question.
Great. And Gary kindly reminded us, do you have the whiteboard function available in your Zoom window?
I'm not sure, but let me find the links. You can ask another question and I'll find the links while answering.
So one attendee asked, I believe I heard that one of the drivers for non-native ground cover invasions is a lack of seed sources for native ground covers. Do you typically recommend spreading native seeds after weed removal events? I've tried unscientifically without much success, but maybe I'm doing it wrong.
Oh, so this is a great question. So one of the things that we're always doing is trying to find ways that like an everyday person can help with planting and not have to dig holes, and like kids to grandparents can do this. And so we have been researching with Ernst Seed Company, seed mixes that we can scatter. And so we're doing some practice now of trying to see if at the edge, testing different seed mixes and plugs of like really, really small plugs of native plants. So yeah, spread all the native seeds you want. The thing is that knowing whether they are compatible with understory, like will grow at an understory level is another question.
Great. And I think the chat is currently just visible to the host and panelists. Gary, are you able to make the chat available to the audience as well so that we can share that link?
I mean, I guess, will it appear in the answers if I put it there?
We can try it. And for folks that might be tuning in to a recording, if you go to baltimoregreenspace.org and look at their resources, you should be able to find that there as well. And one last question as we run out the clock, but a great question. How does one begin to set up a work similar to yours? And how long has your group been doing this?
So we've been doing this work with in Baltimore's forest patches with neighborhood forest leaders since 2011. I guess we had our first walk. And so I mean, I highly recommend looking at Forest Patch First Aid. I'll put it in the, I mean, it kind of walks you through what to do. And I think it's a great resource. First aid. That's what I'd recommend, like looking at if you're trying to think about how to start, how and where to start. We took a lot of time with it, and I'm just putting it in the answer. Hopefully I'm just answering the last question. So hopefully that will help you.
I may have inadvertently sent that onto the answered section, but Gary, if you can copy that over so that it's visible to everyone in the chat.
Does that answer your question? I mean, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to take care of one single forest, it's a different answer than if you want to start an organization that's going to help people take care of forests. You know, if you're just trying to take care of a single forest, I'd say look at Forest Patch First Aid. My colleagues say they love using it in other cities. I'm not just saying that because I wrote it with the neighbors, but like we knew what we were doing. It was like the result of like a few years of work before we produced it. But if you're talking about like how to think a little bit more widely, I would say you want to start something like the Forest Stewardship Network, like get a network of people together to have a conversation and think together. Yeah.
All right, and it is 2:01 by my clock, so I want to be mindful of everyone's time. But Katie, thank you so much for a really terrific discussion. So glad that you were able to join us, and I'll turn it back over to Gary to see us out.
Yeah, and
Well,
the one thing
again,
I
I'm
would
gonna,
say is that if you want to reach out to me, Catherine, Katherine at baltimoregreenspace.org. I will, or Eric at baltimoregreenspace.org. Either of us or both of us could answer your forest questions. Sorry, Gary.
well, I want to thank Katie for an excellent presentation, really remarkable set of data to talk about small green spaces in urban areas, a topic that's frequently not paid sufficient attention to and widely overlooked, particularly in light of smart growth and the work that's been going on in that area for over 35 years in Maryland, which does not set a priority on the preservation of small green spaces in urban areas. It's my hope that we will revisit this topic, and the data that your organization has provided is very provocative and should give people a lot more for reflection on why these spaces must be protected and why the law ought to provide a way of prioritizing their protection. Having said that, I simply want to say again thanks and mention to all of you that our program in January will focus on a education program called the Natural Resources Careers Camp, a program for high school students to attend a summer camp in Western Maryland. If you're interested in a student attending a program that introduces them to what kind of future careers may be available in urban and community forestry and in natural resources careers, this is a unique program that you'll want to attend. Again, the third Thursday in January at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much for attending today, and I want to wish all of you a happy holiday season. Good evening, and thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.